The wind howled through the jagged rocks of Devil's Edge as Mama Thandile's fingers clawed desperately at the crumbling soil. Her eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, locked onto her daughter Amara's cold, emotionless face above. "Please, my children, please." Mama Thandile's voice cracked, her body dangling over the 200-foot drop into the misty abyss below. Kofi stood beside his sister, his expensive leather shoes inches from his mother's trembling hands. He glanced nervously at Amara, who gave him a single, decisive nod. "The land will be ours now, Mama," Amara whispered, her voice as cold as the mountain air. "You should have signed the papers when we asked nicely. I raised you. I gave you everything." Mama Thandile sobbed, her grip weakening. Kofi's jaw clenched. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Humanity? But then he thought of the money, the sprawling acres of valuable land, the inheritance that would make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. He lifted his foot. "Kofi, no. I'm your mother. I carried you in my womb. His shoe came down hard on her fingers. Mama Thandile's scream pierced the twilight as she plummeted into the darkness below, her body swallowed by the thick mist that perpetually shrouded the base of Devil's Edge. The sound of her impact never came, only an eerie, unnatural silence. Amara exhaled slowly, brushing dirt from her designer dress. "It's done." But as they turned to leave, neither sibling noticed the strange glow emanating from the mist below, nor the ancient baobab tree at the cliff's edge that seemed to shudder despite the absence of wind. And they certainly didn't hear the whisper that rode the breeze, a voice that sounded exactly like their mother's. "My children, what you have sown, you shall reap." Let's see what happened. Hello, guys. Welcome to my African Tales. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with your friends, and most important thing, turn your notification bell so you can get informed when I drop another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. What would you do if your spouse tried to kill you and you survive? Will you take a revenge or disappear forever? 3 days earlier, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound of the Mwangi family homestead in the Aberdare Highlands of Kenya. The main house, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that Mama Thandile had built with her late husband's life insurance and decades of tireless farming, stood as a testament to resilience and hard work. Inside the smaller guest cottage, hidden from the main house by a grove of cedar trees, Kofi and Amara sat hunched over a bottle of expensive whiskey that was completely out of place in the rural setting. "She's never going to sign," Kofi said, running his hands through his thinning hair. At 42, he looked older than his years, the consequence of failed business ventures and mounting debts in Nairobi. His designer suit, now wrinkled and stained, hung loosely on his frame. "I've asked her 5 times this month alone. She won't sell the land." Amara swirled the amber liquid in her glass, her manicured nails clicking against the crystal. She was younger by 3 years, but carried herself with a calculated coldness that made her seem ageless. Of course she won't sell. That stubborn old woman thinks she'll live forever, tending her coffee plants and her stupid vegetable gardens like some peasant. She's our mother, Amara. She's an obstacle. Amara's eyes flashed dangerously. "Do you know how much this land is worth? The Chinese corporation offered us 12 million shillings for just half of it. 12 million. And that's before we factor in the timber rights and the mineral survey report I found in her bedroom." Kofi's eyes widened. "Mineral rights? What minerals?" "Rare earth elements. The kind the tech companies will pay billions for." Amara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's a fortune buried beneath this red soil, brother. A fortune that legally becomes ours the moment she dies." The word hung in the air between them like a malevolent spirit. Kofi stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, he could see Mama Thandile in her garden, her weather hands gently tending to her tomato plants. Even at 71, she moved with the grace and strength of a woman half her age. She was singing one of those old Kikuyu hymns she loved, her voice carrying on the breeze. "What are you suggesting?" Kofi asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Amara joined him at the window, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm suggesting we stop waiting for nature to take its course. I'm suggesting we help fate along. That's murder. That's survival. Amara's grip tightened. Your creditors are calling daily. My husband is threatening divorce if I don't pay off my gambling debts. We're both drowning, Kofi. And she's sitting on a life raft she refuses to share. Kofi thought of the threatening messages on his phone, the loan sharks who'd promised to do unspeakable things to his family if he didn't pay up by month's end. He thought of his own children, the school fees he couldn't afford, the shame of being called a failure at every family gathering. How? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Amara smiled, a terrible, triumphant smile that made her beautiful face look monstrous. Devil's Edge. Everyone knows how dangerous that cliff is. How the mist makes it impossible to see the edge. How easily someone could slip and fall, especially an old woman who insists on collecting her precious medicinal herbs up there. It would look like an accident, Kofi murmured, the plan crystallizing in his mind despite his conscience screaming in protest. A tragic accident, Amar confirmed. We'll be the grieving children. We'll inherit everything. And in 6 months, we'll be so rich that this nightmare will feel like a bad dream. Outside, Mama Thandai continued singing, blissfully unaware that her own children, the baby she had nursed, the youngster she had sacrificed everything to educate, the adults she still loved unconditionally, were plotting her death. That night, as thunder rumbled over the highlands and rain battered the tin roof, Kofi and Amara shook hands on their murderous pact. Neither could sleep, but it wasn't guilt that kept them awake. It was anticipation. In 3 days, they told themselves, all their problems would be solved. They had no idea how terribly, horrifically wrong they were. The morning of the 3rd day arrived shrouded in an unsettling mist that clung to the highlands like a burial shroud. Mama Thandai woke before dawn, as she always did, and prepared her woven basket for her weekly trek to Devil's Edge to collect the wild herbs that grew only on those treacherous slopes. Mama, let me come with you, Amara said sweetly over breakfast, her voice dripping with false concern. Those cliffs are dangerous. You shouldn't go alone. Mama Thandai smiled warmly at her daughter, her weathered face crinkling with joy. My dear child, you want to spend time with your old mother? This makes my heart glad. Kofi emerged from his room, looking haggard. He'd barely slept, haunted by nightmares of his mother's face. But Amara's sharp glance reminded him of the debts, the threats, the money that awaited them. I'll come too, he said, his voice hollow. Family time. The 3 of them set off at mid-morning, climbing the winding path through ancient cedar forests and rocky outcrops. Mama Thandai talked cheerfully about her plants, about family history, about how this land had been in their family for 3 generations. She spoke of ancestors and responsibilities, of legacy and duty. With every word, Amara's jaw tightened. With every mention of tradition, Kofi felt his resolve weakening. They reached Devil's Edge just as the midday sun began burning off the morning mist, though thick clouds still obscured the valley below. The cliff jutted out dramatically, a finger of rock pointing accusingly at the sky. Local legend said that evil spirits dwelled in the mist below, waiting to claim the souls of the wicked. Mama Thandai moved toward the edge, searching for the rare herbs that grew in the rocky crevices. Be careful, you two. Stay back from the edge. This place has claimed many lives. Amara and Kofi exchanged glances. This was the moment. Amara approached first, her heart pounding. Mama, there's something, Kofi, and I need to tell you. Mama Thandai turned, her basket half full of herbs. Something in her daughter's tone made her smile fade. What is it, my child? We need you to sign over the land. Now. Today. Amara's mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Mama Thandai's eyes widened. What? No, we've discussed this. This land stays in the family, passed down properly, not sold to... We're not asking anymore, Mama. Kofi stepped forward, his face twisted with desperation and guilt. We're telling you. Sign the papers, or what? Mama Thandai's voice rose with indignation. You'll threaten your own mother? Have I raised vipers? You've raised survivors. Amara shouted, grabbing her mother's arm roughly. You sit on millions while we suffer, while we drown in debt. It's selfish, Mama. It's cruel. Mama Thandai wrenched her arm free, backing toward the cliff edge. Money has poisoned your hearts, my children. I see it now. I see what you become. Tears streamed down her weathered face. But I will never sign. This land is not mine to sell. It belongs to your children, to their children, to the ancestors who... Enough! Amara lunged forward, shoving her mother hard. Mama Thandai stumbled backward, her feet finding only air. Her basket flew from her hands, herbs scattering like tears. She caught the crumbling edge with her fingertips, her body swinging over the abyss. Amara, what have you done? Kofi screamed, rushing forward. For a moment, he reached for his mother's hand, but Amara grabbed his wrist. Don't you dare. We've come too far. Mama Thandai hung there, suspended between life and death, her eyes meeting her children's. In that moment, she saw everything, their greed, their betrayal, their damnation. Please, she whispered. My children, please. The land will be ours now, Mama, Amara said coldly. You should have signed the papers when we asked nicely. I raised you. I gave you everything. Mama Thandai sobbed, her fingers slipping on the wet earth. Kofi looked at his mother's terrified face, then at Amara's determined one. He thought of the money, the debts, the easy life awaiting them. His humanity wrestled with his greed, and greed won. He lifted his foot and brought it down hard on his mother's fingers. Mama Thandai's scream tore through the air as she plummeted into the mist. But instead of the sickening thud they expected, there was only silence, an unnatural, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow all sound. Kofi collapsed to his knees, vomiting over the rocks. Amara stood rigid, staring into the mist below, her chest heaving. It's done, she finally said. We go back. We wait a few hours. Then we report her missing. We searched everywhere. She must have slipped and fallen while collecting herbs. Everyone knows how dangerous this place is. But as they turned to leave, the ancient baobab tree at the cliff's edge, a tree that had stood for 500 years, suddenly cracked down its center with a sound like thunder. The wind rose, howling like a chorus of the damned, though the leaves on the ground remained perfectly still. And from the mist below came a whisper in Mama Thandai's voice. My children, what you have sown you shall reap. The ancestors are watching, and they are not pleased. Kofi and Amara ran, their mother's final curse chasing them down the mountain. Neither looked back. Neither saw the figure that rose from the mist. Translucent, shimmering, with eyes that glowed like hot coals in the gathering darkness. The haunting had only just begun. For days past, Mama Thandai's body had been recovered from the base of Devil's Edge by reluctant villagers who reported strange occurrences during the retrieval. Whispers in the mist, inexplicable cold spots, and the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The funeral was held quickly, attended by the entire village who mourned the loss of a beloved matriarch. Kofi and Amara played their parts perfectly, the devastated son and daughter, weeping over their mother's closed casket. They spoke movingly of her dedication to family, her love of the land, her tragic accident. Village elders nodded sympathetically, though some of the older women watched the siblings with narrowed, suspicious eyes. The inheritance proceedings began immediately. Amara had ensured all the paperwork was in order. Within days, they would be wealthy beyond imagination. But on the night after the funeral, the haunting began in earnest. Kofi woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of singing, that old Kikuyu his mother used to sing in the garden. He sat bolt upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound was coming from outside his window. He stumbled to the curtain and yanked it aside. There, in the moonlit garden, stood a figure in his mother's favorite yellow dress, tending to the tomato plants with familiar, loving gestures. No, Kofi whispered, his blood turning to ice. No, no, no. The figure slowly turned. Where his mother's face should have been, there was only shadow, deep, impenetrable shadow with 2 points of light where eyes should be. The singing continued, but the mouth didn't move. Kofi screamed and fell backward, tangling himself in the curtains. When he scrambled back to the window seconds later, the garden was empty, But the tomato plants his mother had tended for years were now withered and black, as if scorched by fire. Meanwhile, across the compound in the main house, Amara sat at her mother's desk, reviewing the mineral survey reports by lamplight. The electricity had been flickering strangely all evening, and she'd resorted to old-fashioned kerosene lamps. She reached for her glass of wine and froze. In the amber liquid, a face stared back at her, her mother's face, twisted in anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. Amara dropped the glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but the wine didn't spread naturally. Instead, it pooled into words written in Kikuyu. Musi, murderer. "This isn't real," Amara muttered, grabbing a cloth to wipe up the wine. Guilt. Just guilt. Nothing more. But as she cleaned, she heard breathing. Slow, labored breathing like someone struggling for air. She spun around. The room was empty. Yet the breathing continued, growing louder, more desperate, until it became the sound of someone choking, gasping, falling. Amara ran from the room, slamming the door behind her. She didn't see the wet footprints that appeared on the floor behind her, footprints that tracked red soil from Devil's Edge through every room of the house. The next morning, both siblings looked haggard and terrified. They met in the kitchen, neither having slept after their encounters. "You heard it too?" Kofi asked, his hands trembling around his coffee mug. "Saw it," Amara corrected, though her usual composure cracked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "It's just our minds playing tricks. Guilt manifesting as hallucinations. It's psychological, nothing more." But even as she spoke, the temperature in the kitchen dropped dramatically. Their breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. The windows began to frost over despite the warm morning outside. And then they heard it, a voice they'd hoped never to hear again, echoing through the house. "My children, did you think death would silence me? Did you think the ancestors would ignore your crime?" Every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. Every window cracked in perfect vertical lines. And on the kitchen wall, written in what looked like ash, appeared a message. 7 days. The price must be paid. Kofi and Amara clung to each other in terror, their greed-fueled confidence evaporating like morning mist. They had wanted their mother's wealth. Instead, they had awakened something far more terrifying than poverty. They had awakened a wrath of the ancestors, the fury of a mother's betrayed love, and the ancient justice that waited in the shadows for those who spilled family blood. Old Kamau, the village elder, arrived unexpectedly at noon. He stood at the doorway, refusing to enter, his ancient face grave with knowing. "I warned your mother about you, too," he said quietly. She didn't want to believe her children could be so corrupted, but the ancestors see all. They whispered to those who still listen. He pointed a gnarled finger at them. "You have 7 days to confess your sin and accept your punishment, or the ancestors will take what is owed. And their justice, my children, is far more terrible than any human court." He turned to leave, then paused. "The spirits of Devil's Edge do not forgive the murder of kin. Whatever haunts you now is only the beginning. Sleep well if you can." As his figure disappeared down the path, Kofi and Amara realized with dawning horror that their nightmare wasn't ending. It was just beginning. And somewhere in the mist-shrouded valleys below Devil's Edge, something that had once been Mama Thandai's smiled with lips that no longer belonged to the living. By the third night, Kofi had stopped sleeping altogether. Heavy bags sagged beneath his bloodshot eyes as he paced his room, every light blazing, his phone clutched in his trembling hands. But even technology offered no refuge. His mother's face appeared in every photograph on social media, her eyes following him accusingly no matter how many times he deleted the apps and reinstalled them. The singing never stopped. That hymn, her hymn, played on an endless loop, sometimes from the garden, sometimes from the walls themselves, sometimes from inside his own skull. He'd tried leaving the compound, checking into a hotel in Nairi, but the singing followed him. The staff found him at 4 a.m., screaming in the lobby about the old woman in the yellow dress standing at the foot of his bed. They sent him home, suggesting he see a doctor or a priest. Amara fared no better, though she fought against the terror with fury instead of fear. She'd hired a contractor to begin surveying the land, trying to push forward with the sale despite everything. But workers fled after the first day, reporting tools that moved by themselves, sudden sinkholes that appeared beneath their feet, and the constant sensation of invisible hands pushing them toward the cliff's edge. Superstitious fools, Amara snarled, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd stopped looking in mirrors after seeing her mother's reflection standing behind her own, watching with those terrible, glowing eyes. The worst was the smell. Everywhere Amara went, she was followed by the scent of wet earth and wild herbs, the exact combination her mother had always carried home from Devil's Edge. It clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. No amount of perfume or scrubbing could remove it. On the fifth night, things escalated horrifically. Kofi woke to find his room filled with red soil, the distinctive red earth from Devil's Edge. It poured from the ceiling like rain, accumulating in drifts against the walls, burying his furniture. He was ankle-deep in it within seconds, the weight pressing down, threatening to bury him alive. "I'm sorry," he screamed, clawing at the soil. "Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't want to. Amara made me do it." The soil stopped falling instantly. In the sudden silence, he heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate footsteps that left wet prints on the soil. A figure materialized from the shadows, and this time it was perfectly, horrifyingly clear. Mama Thandai stood before him, her body broken from the fall, bones jutting at wrong angles, her head tilted unnaturally. Soil and blood dripped from her fingertips, the same fingers he had crushed beneath his shoe. "You chose this," she whispered, her voice like wine through a graveyard. "My own son, my own blood. You chose money over love, greed over family. Please, Mama, please." Kofi sobbed, collapsing to his knees. "I'll confess. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything." Confess to the living? His mother's ghost tilted her shattered head, a terrible smile on her lips. "The living cannot give you the punishment you deserve. Only the ancestors can balance the scale." Her hand, cold as death, solid as judgment, touched his forehead. Images flooded Kofi's mind. His mother's life, every sacrifice she'd made, every time she'd gone hungry so her children could eat, every prayer she'd whispered for their success, every tear she'd shed in joy at their achievements. And then he saw himself through her eyes, the moment he'd raised his foot, the choice he'd made, the son she'd loved becoming the instrument of her death. Kofi screamed until his voice gave out. When his sister found him the next morning, he was catatonic, staring at nothing, red soil still scattered across his floor though the ceiling showed no damage. Amara knew she was next. She barricaded herself in her room, pushing furniture against the door, but she knew it was futile. That night, she didn't bother trying to sleep. She sat in the center of the room, a knife in her hand. Though whether to defend herself or end her torment, she no longer knew. At midnight, every light in the house went out. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. And in that darkness, Amara heard her mother's voice, clear as day. "You were always the strong one, my daughter, the clever one. I was so proud of you, and yet you became the cruelest. Stay away from me." Amara shrieked, slashing the knife at the darkness. "I cannot stay away. I am your mother. Even in death, even after betrayal, I am bound to you by blood. But now, that blood cries out for justice." The lights blazed back on. Amara found herself no longer in her room, but standing at the edge of Devil's Edge, the mist swirling around her feet, the sheer drop inches away. She was back at the scene of the murder. "No. How?" "Experience what you gave me," her mother's voice commanded. "Feel what I felt." Invisible hands gripped Amara's shoulders and shoved her forward. She felt herself falling, screaming, the rocks rushing up to meet her. But just before impact, she was yanked back, standing once more at the edge. The fall repeated again and again and again. Each time, she felt the terror, the betrayal, the helpless knowledge that her own children had murdered her. After the seventh fall, Amara collapsed at the cliff's edge, broken not in body but in spirit. Tears streamed down her face as the sun began to rise over the highlands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was evil. I deserve whatever comes. The ghost of Mama Thandai appeared one final time, kneeling beside her daughter. For a moment, her face softened, showing a love that even death couldn't extinguish. Tomorrow is the 7th day, she said quietly. You know what must be done. Then she vanished, leaving Amara alone with her guilt and the approaching dawn. The 7th day dawned blood-red over the Aberdare Highlands, the sun rising like an angry eye to witness the conclusion of a mother's curse. The entire village had gathered at the Mwangi compound, summoned by some instinct older than words, drawn by the ancient pull of justice about to be served. Old Kamal stood at the center, his staff planted firmly in the red earth. Beside him, inexplicably, stood Inspector Mutiso from a Nairi police station. The officer had driven to the night after receiving an anonymous tip, a woman's voice on the phone, providing detailed evidence of murder. Kofi and Amara emerged from the house, looking like shadows of themselves. Neither had slept in days. Neither had eaten. The haunting had hollowed them out, leaving only guilt and terror. It's time, Kofi said simply, his voice dead. We confess. The crowd murmured in shock as the siblings fell to their knees before the elder and the inspector. In broken voices, they told everything. The conspiracy, the push, the murder of their own mother for money. Some villagers wept. Others shouted in anger. But Kamal raised his hand for silence. The law will punish you, Inspector Mutiso said grimly, reaching for his handcuffs. Murder, conspiracy, fraud. You'll spend the rest of your lives in prison. That's not enough. A voice rang out across the compound. Everyone froze. Standing at the edge of the gathering, where the cedar trees cast deep shadows, was Mama Thandai. But this was not a ghost. This was flesh and blood. Mama Thandai walked forward, leaning heavily on a walking stick, her body battered and bruised but very much alive. The crowd parted in stunned silence as she approached her children. Mama? Amara's voice cracked. But we saw you fall. You're dead, the funeral. You saw what you expected to see, Mama Thandai replied, her voice strong despite her injuries. When you pushed me, I fell only 20 feet, into the arms of an old baobab tree growing from the cliff face. The ancestors guided my fall, cushioning me in branches that shouldn't have been strong enough to hold me, but were. Kofi's face went white. Then the body, the funeral. A body was found at the base of Devil's Edge, a woman who had disappeared months ago, a vagrant with no family. The elders recognized this as a sign. Kamal spoke now, his eyes hard as flint. The ancestors wanted your confession, your true repentance. So we buried her in Mama Thandai's place and allowed you to inherit your guilt. The haunting, Amara whispered, was real, Mama Thandai confirmed. I may be alive, but the spirits of our ancestors are very much awake. They showed you visions of what you had done, forced you to feel the weight of your crime, the singing, the apparitions, the terrors, those with their judgment upon you. Old Kamal struck his staff against the ground 3 times. Your mother could have revealed herself immediately, but she wanted to give you a chance, to see if you had any humanity left, if guilt could crack the stone of your hearts. And it did. Inspector Mutiso stepped forward with handcuffs. Your confession will be taken as evidence. You'll both stand trial for attempted murder. But before he could reach them, Mama Thandai held up her hand. Wait! She stood before her children, looking down at their broken forms. I am alive. By law. You attempted to kill me, but failed. You will go to prison. Yes, but first, you will hear what I have to say. She knelt, her weather hands cupping her children's tear-stained faces. I loved you from the moment you were born. I gave you everything I had, and you tried to take everything I had left. The land you wanted so badly, I've donated it all, every acre, to the village. It will become a school, a hospital, a farm cooperative. Your greed has ensured that hundreds will benefit for what you tried to steal. Mama, please, Kofi sobbed. No, listen. Her voice hardened. You will go to prison. You will serve your time. And if you ever come out, you will be penniless, landless, and burdened with the knowledge that you tried to murder your own mother for money you will never see. That is your inheritance. Shame, poverty, and the memory of what you've done. She stood, turning her back on them. Take them away, Inspector. I have mourned the children I raised. These two strangers are no longer mine. As Inspector Mutiso led the sobbing, handcuffed siblings to his vehicle, the village watched in silence. Some felt pity. Most felt justice had been served, though whether by human law or ancestral intervention, none could say for certain. Old Kamau approached Mama Thandai as the police car disappeared down the red dirt road. The ancestors protected you, Mama, but why did you let them suffer for 7 days? You could have revealed yourself sooner. Mama Thandai gazed toward Devil's Edge, where the morning mist was finally burning away, because I needed to know if there was any goodness left in them, any remorse, any humanity. The haunting showed me the truth. They were sorry only because they were caught by forces they couldn't fight. Given the chance, without the supernatural fear, they would have done it again. And now, Kamau asked, now they face human justice. And when they die, whether in prison or many years from now, they will face the ancestors' judgment. I will not be there to speak for them. She turned back to the compound, to the garden she loved, to the land she had saved from greed. I have a school to build, and tomato plants to tend. Life continues, elder, even after death has brushed so close. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last vestiges of mist, the village began to disperse. The story of Mwangi's siblings will be told for generations, a cautionary tale about greed, betrayal, and the price of breaking the sacred bond between mother and child. Some nights, villagers still reported hearing singing near Devil's Edge, that old Kikuyu about faith, family, and forgiveness, and some swore they saw an old woman in a yellow dress, tending to wild herbs on the cliff face, forever kept safe by branches that shouldn't hold but do. Whether it was a ghost of what might have been or the spirit of a mother's love that transcends even betrayal, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed on one truth. The ancestors are always watching, and at Devil's Edge, they are always waiting. Mama Thandai lived to be 97, surrounded by the village children who studied in the school built on her donated land. Kofi died in prison after 5 years, his heart giving out from guilt and grief. Amara served 15 years and was released, penniless and broken, to live as a beggar in Nairobi, recognizing, too late, that her mother's love had been the only wealth that ever mattered, and the land that had sparked such greed became a place of healing, learning, and community, a legacy far greater than any mineral deposit or corporate sale could have achieved.